The sun was beginning to set over Briarwood County, a town too small for most maps and too divided for its own peace. The dying light bled through the oak-lined roads, bathing everything in a crimson glow as Aaliyah Reed, 17 years old, drove home from her after-school job at the local bookstore. The road stretched out before her like a promise of normalcy, but in towns like Briarwood, promises were fragile things. Aaliyah was a tall, sharp-eyed black girl with braids pulled back into a ponytail and a mind sharper than most folks twice her age. Her old Honda Civic hummed steadily, its dashboard light blinking a familiar orange. She knew these roads better than the faces of half the people in this town, knew where the potholes lay, where the deer tended to cross, and more importantly, where the cops liked to set up traps. Which was why her stomach dropped the moment she saw the red and blue lights flash in her rearview mirror. She signaled, pulled over smoothly, cut the engine, and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel, the way her mother had taught her. The way every black parent teaches their child, like a grim inheritance. She could already feel the heat rising in her cheeks, not from guilt, but from the bone-deep dread of what might come next. The cruiser behind her idled for a moment. 2 officers stepped out. She recognized them both. Officer Greg Stanton, mid-40s, stocky, a reputation for losing his temper at traffic stops, and next to him, Officer Tessa Whitmore, blonde, mid-20s, sharp-jawed, the police chief's daughter, known less for her competence than for her lineage. Stanton tapped the flashlight against her window. "License and registration," he barked. Aaliyah reached carefully, narrating every move as her heart pounded against her ribs. "I'm reaching for my wallet now, sir. It's in my front pocket." "Slowly," Tessa added, one hand resting casually on the grip of her sidearm. Aaliyah handed over the worn ID card and registration. "Driving with a busted tail light," Stanton announced. "I wasn't aware it was out, sir," she replied, steady but tight. "You on something, girl? You look nervous." "Because you pulled me over," Aaliyah said before she could stop herself. It was the wrong thing to say. Tessa smirked. "Smart mouth?" Stanton leaned into the window, his breath sour. "Step out of the vehicle." Aaliyah's pulse spiked. "Sir, is there a reason?" "Now!" The tension crackled like a static charge in the heavy summer air. Aaliyah stepped out, keeping her hands raised. "Spread 'em," Stanton ordered, nudging her shoulder roughly as he spun her toward the hood. "I don't have anything on me," she said. "We'll see about that," Tessa replied, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. In Briarwood County, officers carried personal body cams. And worse, tonight, they were live broadcasting their patrol as part of the department's new social media transparency program, a public relations stunt turned horror show. The department's Facebook Live was already climbing past 300 viewers, townsfolk watching from their kitchens, bars, and back porches. Stanton ran his hands down her sides with unnecessary aggression. Tessa circled to the front. And then it happened. Tessa yanked up the hem of Aaliyah's skirt. The world slowed. The cold air hit the back of her thighs. Gasps sounded from somewhere, maybe in her own throat, maybe from the live stream audience. The comments on the screen began to explode. Some jeering, others horrified. Aaliyah's mind screamed, but no sound left her lips. Every survival instinct told her not to move, not to flinch. Stanton laughed. "Look at this," he crowed. "Nothing. She's clean." "Guess you get to go home after all." Tessa dropped the fabric with a sickening casualness. "Next time you watch your tone." Aaliyah's fists clenched so tightly she felt her nails cut into her palms. But she didn't speak. She wouldn't give them that. "Get in your car," Stanton said. The live stream was still rolling. She did. And she drove. But her life, and Briarwood, had already shifted on its axis. When Aaliyah reached home, she parked in the driveway, cut the engine, and sat in the dark silence of her car for a long time. She touched her face, half expecting it to be different, rearranged by shame. Her phone vibrated in the cup holder. 57 missed messages. The incident was everywhere: classmates, strangers, activists, news outlets. But the one text that made her freeze came from her cousin Malik. They didn't know I was listening. Call me. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. The town of Briarwood wasn't ready for the wildfire it had just lit. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Aaliyah Reed's name was on the lips of every local, and not for the reasons she'd spent her young life working for. The video, originally meant as a PR stunt to show community policing in action, had gone viral for reasons the department hadn't foreseen. It started small, a few horrified comments from late-night viewers. Someone screen-recorded it, then a local college activist posted the clip on Twitter with the caption, "They pulled up this black girl's skirt. On Facebook Live, in broad daylight. No warrant, no justification." Remember her name, Aaliyah Reed. By morning, it had over 600,000 retweets. The clip had been reshared on Reddit, picked up by a popular true crime TikTok creator, and debated on Black Twitter, where hashtags like #Justice for Aaliyah and Briarwood PD trended within hours. News trucks from Atlanta and Birmingham parked outside the Briarwood courthouse. Civil rights attorneys tweeted their pro bono offers before Aaliyah had even opened her eyes. But not everyone was outraged. In Briarwood itself, the split was vicious. At Joni's diner, the old men at the corner booth insisted Aaliyah had probably been hiding something. That those people always cried victim when called out. At church, Miss Hazel from the choir prayed loudly for the safety of our brave boys in blue. Meanwhile, the black community in town boiled with a silent, mounting rage. The barber shop down on Jefferson Street played the video on repeat, and no one spoke for the first 10 minutes after it aired. At Daisy's beauty parlor, women cried behind their masks, remembering stories their mothers and grandmothers told about the old days. Days they'd prayed were long gone, but Aaliyah's silence was the loudest thing of all. In the small blue house on Marigold Lane, she sat curled on her bedroom floor, phone buzzing endlessly beside her. Calls from reporters. Activists. Outraged strangers, her aunties from Atlanta, her AP history teacher, even a counselor from the NAACP regional office. But Aaliyah didn't answer any of them. Her mind replayed the exact moment Tessa Whitmore lifted her skirt. The cold air, the sound of laughter, the look on Stanton's face. Her fists clenched reflexively every time the memory surfaced. She felt stained by it, as if her own skin had betrayed her by being there. A knock sounded at the door. It was Malik. Malik was 20, sharp-eyed, a computer engineering student who'd come back home for the summer. He was the kind of kid who didn't believe in coincidence. He carried his laptop under one arm, his phone in the other. "I need you to see this," he said. Aaliyah didn't speak, just pulled herself up onto the bed. Malik opened the laptop, tapping quickly. A grainy audio file began to play, the sound of static, then clear voices. "Get the bitch out of the car. Make an example out of her." "Tessa, you want to do the honors?" It was Stanton's voice. Malik looked grim. "I was tuning my scanner last night, catching dispatch calls. I left the recording running. They knew exactly what they were doing, Aaliyah. It wasn't random. They picked you." Aaliyah stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. "Why?" Malik hesitated. "You know Officer Whitmore's dad, right? Chief Whitmore? He's covering for her, always has. Tessa got caught in a bar fight last year, beat some girl half to death. No charges. Her file's sealed tighter than Fort Knox. And last month her ex-boyfriend filed a complaint, disappeared. The department protects her because she's the chief's daughter. And last night you embarrassed her by not being afraid." Aaliyah felt the blood drain from her face. "I didn't do anything." "That's exactly it," Malik said. And she couldn't stand it. There was a beat of heavy silence before Aaliyah spoke again. "How do you know all this?" Malik looked away. "I've been digging since last summer. Since they jumped Marcus down at the river and said it was self-defense. Since the coroner lost his file. I've got folders, Aaliyah, names, incidents, hidden reports. You're not the first." Aaliyah's stomach turned. "But you could be the last," Malik added quietly. Another message pinged on Aaliyah's phone, this one from a civil rights attorney in Atlanta. "We're ready when you are. Just say the word." Aaliyah picked up the phone, fingers trembling. "Do it," she whispered to Malik. "Leak it. All of it." Malik grinned grimly. "Thought you'd never ask." As the town prepared for Sunday morning services, a storm was already brewing online. Aaliyah wasn't ready to tell her story. Not yet. But Malik's leak would speak for her. And in the distance, behind the walls of the Briarwood Police Department, Chief Whitmore would soon feel the first ripple of the tidal wave he'd built with his own hands. Aaliyah didn't sleep that night. The hours crawled by in fits of restless half-dozing, flashes of that roadside violation snapping her awake. The cold air, the jeering laugh, the glint of a body cam she hadn't realized was broadcasting her humiliation to the world. Every time she closed her eyes, it was there again, like some cursed loop she couldn't escape. By dawn, her room was thick with the stale air of a night spent grieving in silence, the walls plastered with posters of James Baldwin quotes and Beyoncé lyrics. Felt like they were closing in. Her phone had died somewhere after 3 in the morning, buzzing itself to death under a pillow. She found Malik in the kitchen, already at work. His laptop was open beside a half-eaten plate of eggs, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Coffee's still hot," he said without looking up. Aaliyah poured herself a cup, ignoring how her hand trembled as she lifted it to her lips. "I saw it," she murmured. Malik raised an eyebrow. "The leak." Aaliyah nodded. She'd finally summoned the nerve to check Twitter before dawn. Malik had uploaded the audio files and internal records under an anonymous handle. In less than 4 hours, it had reached over 2 million views. The video from the live stream was now paired with audio of Stanton's voice, barking slurs and orders like he was on a damn plantation. "I figured if they were gonna strip you down in public, they might as well get stripped too," Malik said, his jaw tight. Aaliyah set the mug down. "I need to talk." Malik glanced up, startled. She'd been nearly silent since it happened. "Talk to who?" "Everyone." Before Malik could protest, Aaliyah grabbed his phone and called her mother, who lived in Atlanta, working nights at Grady Hospital. Then her aunt in Montgomery, her old debate coach from high school. She told them all the same thing. "I'm ready." By noon, reporters from CNN and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution were waiting in the driveway. Aaliyah hadn't bothered to change out of her hoodie and leggings. If they wanted to see her, they were going to see her as she was. She stepped onto the porch to the flash of cameras. "Miss Reed," a woman with a mic called out. "Would you like to make a statement?" Aaliyah took a deep breath. "I didn't ask for any of this," she began, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. "I was coming home from work. I followed every rule my mama ever taught me about surviving a traffic stop. And still, they violated me. In front of the whole town. In front of the whole country." She paused, scanning the faces, some sympathetic, some hungry for scandal. "And it turns out," she continued, "the person who did it isn't just a bad cop. She's the police chief's daughter, protected by this town's good old boy network for years. Well, no more." Aaliyah's gaze hardened. "I'm not here to be your victim. I'm not here to give you a neat, clean story about forgiveness either. I'm here to burn the whole rotten tree down. From the roots up." The cameras clicked. The reporters scribbled furiously. Aaliyah didn't care. "I want an independent investigation. I want those officers charged. I want Chief Whitmore fired. And I want every black girl in this country to know she doesn't have to stay silent just to survive." Malik stepped out beside her, holding his laptop high. "And for the record," he shouted, "we've got receipts. Years of them." The crowd murmured. Aaliyah turned to go back inside when a slim, pale woman broke through the group. Mid-20s, sharp blue eyes, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. "Aaliyah," she called. The reporters paused. Aaliyah froze. It was Officer Tessa Whitmore. She wasn't in uniform, wore jeans and a faded hoodie like any other civilian, but her face carried that unmistakable badge of someone used to power, even stripped of her title. Aaliyah braced herself. But what Tessa said next shook her more than anything else that week. "I need to talk to you," she said, voice tight. "I wasn't supposed to—" Her throat bobbed. "There's something you don't know about that night." The camera's word, capturing every second. Aaliyah's world tilted, because whatever came next wasn't in the script, and for the first time since the roadside assault, she wasn't sure what was waiting on the other side. The front porch held its collective breath. Cameras, reporters, neighbors peering from behind curtains, all of them frozen as Officer Tessa Whitmore stood there, stripped of her badge, but still cloaked in the cold authority of her bloodline. Aaliyah Reed, whose name had become a rallying cry in less than 24 hours, stared at the woman who'd humiliated her in front of the world. "I don't have anything to say to you," Aaliyah said, each word like a stone dropping in a still pond. Tessa's face twitched, a flicker of something halfway between shame and panic. "Please," she tried again, lowering her voice. "Not for me. For you. For all of us." Aaliyah's hands balled into fists at her sides. She could feel Malik behind her, practically vibrating with fury. But something in Tessa's expression, a kind of terrified defiance, made Aaliyah pause. "1 minute," she said. "Inside." Gasps rose from the crowd. Reporters shouted, shoving mics forward. Malik started to object, but Aaliyah raised a hand. She wasn't afraid of this woman. Not anymore. Inside, the living room still smelled like last night's burnt coffee. The blinds were drawn. Aaliyah closed the door, leaving Malik and the cameras outside. The two of them stood facing one another like opponents in a ring. "Well?" Aaliyah demanded. Tessa hesitated, looking down at the floor. When she spoke, it wasn't the rehearsed, self-assured voice of a cop defending her actions. "I wasn't supposed to stop you that night," Tessa whispered. "It was supposed to be someone else." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. "What the hell does that mean?" Tessa swallowed hard. "There's a list, Aaliyah, in the department. Certain people flagged for street-level contact. People they think need watching, pressure, intimidation. Your name's been on it for over a year." Aaliyah felt her stomach turn. "You're lying." "I wish I was." Tessa looked genuinely sick now, leaning against the wall like the weight of what she was saying might crush her. "It started after that school board meeting last spring," she went on, "when you spoke out about them canceling that Black History program. The chief, my dad, he didn't like you making noise. Said you were getting uppity. Said you needed to be reminded where you stood." Aaliyah's pulse hammered in her ears. She remembered that night. How she'd stood up in front of a room full of old white men and demanded they reinstate the African American Studies elective. How she'd left to find her car keyed and a ticket on the windshield. She thought it was coincidence. It wasn't. "Why now?" Aaliyah's voice cracked. "Why come here? Why tell me this?" Tessa's shoulders slumped. "Because I didn't know it was being streamed. I didn't know people would care." Her voice caught on the word. "I thought it would be like all the other times." Aaliyah's lip curled. "So it's not guilt, it's self-preservation. I don't expect you to forgive me. Hell, I don't even deserve to ask. But you need to know. It goes deeper than me. Deeper than Stanton. It's the chief, it's the sheriff's office, it's the mayor, it's this whole damn town." A beat of silence passed between them. "I'll testify," Tessa added. "Against them. Against my father. I'll name every officer, every fake report, every cover-up. But I need your help to get out. I need protection." Aaliyah stared at her for a long moment. The rage in her chest battled with something colder, sharper. She wasn't about to let this woman rewrite herself as some hero, but neither could she ignore what was being offered. "You don't get to frame this like you're brave," Aaliyah said finally, voice low and lethal. "You're a coward. You helped them. You laughed at me. And you'll answer for every second of that, but if you can help take them down, you will." Tessa swallowed. "I will." Aaliyah opened the door. Malik looked up, his face a storm of questions. The reporters surged forward again. "Tessa Whitmore is ready to confess," Aaliyah announced. voice ringing out clear and sure. "And we're gonna bury this whole damn system with her testimony." The cameras flashed. Somewhere downtown, Chief Whitmore's phone was already ringing. And in that moment, Aaliyah Reed realized something she hadn't believed just a day ago. The fear was no longer hers. It belonged to them. Across town, in the heart of Briarwood's crumbling civic center, Police Chief Douglas Whitmore paced his office like a cornered wolf. The news reports played on mute, but he didn't need the volume. He'd watched the footage a dozen times already. The roadside stop, the skirt lifted, the look in that girl's eyes. Worse than the public outrage was the face of his own daughter, standing there, complicit. He slammed a fist onto his desk, the old oak surface rattling beneath the force. How had this gotten out of control so fast? They'd done this 100 times before. Intimidate a loudmouth, make a troublemaker disappear into court fines and probation. Hell, there were folders in the filing cabinets with more secrets than the mayor's vault. And now this girl, this damn Aaliyah Reed, had shattered the glass. His phone buzzed for the third time in as many minutes. It was Mayor Carlton Hayes. "Whitmore," the chief grunted, snatching it up. "You've lost the town, Doug," the mayor hissed without preamble. "They're protesting outside my house. National media's swarming this place like goddamn locusts, and your idiot daughter is at the center of it." "I'll handle it." "You'll handle nothing," Hayes snapped. "We've got state investigators inbound, civil rights attorneys circling like vultures. If this gets traced back to us, it won't," Whitmore growled. "I've got my people pulling files now, cleaning up loose ends." But even as he said it, a cold knot tightened in his gut. Because there was one loose end he couldn't control. His daughter, Tessa. The kid had always been headstrong, reckless, but she'd never crossed him. Until now. For her to show up at that girl's house to talk to the press? It was a betrayal worse than any he'd expected. Another buzz, another message. From Stanton. "Trouble. Malik Reed's leak has internal files. He got everything, Chief. Everything." Whitmore's stomach flipped. He bolted from his office and down the hall to the records room, shoving open the door. Officer Brad Jenkins, a thick-necked, good old boy with too much beer in his gut and too many skeletons in his closet, was already there, yanking files from cabinets. "Get rid of it all," Whitmore barked. Jenkins hesitated. "But Chief, all of it." A stack of manila folders hit the floor, reports, photos, notes about targeted stops, lists of names, mostly black and brown, names flagged for enhanced patrol. It wasn't just Aaliyah. It was half the damn town. But as Jenkins reached for the matchbox Whitmore tossed at him, the door burst open. Deputy State Attorney Imani Rivers stepped inside, flanked by 2 state troopers. A black woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense suit, she radiated authority like a storm cloud. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Chief." Whitmore froze. "This is illegal search and seizure," he barked. "No," Rivers said, holding up a signed warrant. "This is a state-sanctioned investigation into civil rights violations, abuse of power, and criminal conspiracy. And you," she added, eyes narrowing, "are done." For a moment, Whitmore considered running, fighting. Something primal urged him to grab the old service revolver in his desk drawer. But something else, the knowledge that his empire was crumbling faster than he could patch it, made his hands drop to his sides. As the troopers cuffed Jenkins and began securing evidence, Rivers approached the desk. "Your daughter's testifying, Doug." The words hit harder than any blow. "Bullshit," he snarled. "She turned herself in an hour ago, told us about the list, the cover-ups, Marcus Turner's death, everything." Whitmore staggered back a step. Rivers leaned in, her voice like a blade. "You were untouchable in this town for 30 years. Intimidated witnesses, buried cases. But it only takes one spark to burn a forest down. And burn it would." Outside the station, protesters had gathered, their signs high and their chants loud. National networks broadcasted the scene live. Justice for Aaliyah. Dismantle the system. Accountability now. In the midst of them stood Aaliyah Reed, holding a microphone, her voice clear as a bell. For every kid they tried to silence, for every family they threatened, for every name on that list, we say no more. As the station's front doors opened, and Whitmore was led out in cuffs, his face pale and defeated, the crowd roared. Aaliyah met his gaze as he passed, and for the first time in his life, Douglas Whitmore looked afraid. It was a Thursday evening when the first formal charges dropped. The courthouse, a squat brick building older than half the state, became the epicenter of a reckoning Briarwood had spent decades avoiding. The smell of fresh-cut grass mingled with sweat and hot pavement as dozens of protesters and supporters gathered outside. Handmade signs waved in the fading daylight. Justice for Aaliyah, abolish the list, protect black girls. Inside, the temperature felt 3 degrees too warm, the air thick with tension. Aaliyah sat in the second row of the courtroom gallery, her hands steady in her lap, though her pulse drummed loud in her ears. Malik sat beside her, his laptop open, streaming every development to the thousands watching online. Across the aisle sat Tessa Whitmore. Stripped of her uniform and badge, Tessa looked smaller than Aaliyah remembered. Her lawyer, a sharp-faced woman from Birmingham, kept whispering into her ear, but Tessa barely moved. She stared straight ahead, face a mask of resignation, knowing the entire world was watching. The judge called the hearing to order. Prosecutors stood, listing the charges against Douglas Whitmore and Officer Stanton: civil rights violations, abuse of power, falsification of official documents, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom gasped when additional charges surfaced for 2 other officers and a town clerk who'd doctored records for years. But it was what came next that landed hardest. Deputy State Attorney Imani Rivers rose, documents in hand. Your Honor, we submit into evidence Exhibit 17, the flagged individuals list, maintained by the Briarwood Police Department for a minimum of 7 years, targeting local black residents and other marginalized groups for unjustified stops, surveillance, and harassment. A collective shudder moved through the room. Aaliyah felt Malik's hand grip hers. The list had names. Hundreds of them, her classmates, her neighbors. The church deacon, old Miss Caroline from the corner store. Names flagged for nothing more than their skin color or the fact they'd once spoken out. Rivers continued. This list was approved and maintained by Chief Douglas Whitmore, with knowledge and cooperation from several city officials. Gasps. A juror's face went pale. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. When the prosecution announced their first witness, it wasn't one of the officers. It was Tessa. Aaliyah's breath caught. The room hushed as Tessa was sworn in, stepping up to the stand in plain clothes. The contrast between her pale skin and the brown-polished wood of the witness box was stark. She didn't look at Aaliyah. Not once. Miss Whitmore, Rivers began. Did you knowingly participate in the targeted stop and search of Aaliyah Reed? A long pause. Tessa's voice was brittle, barely audible. Yes. A low murmur swept the room. Were you aware your department maintained a list targeting black residents for unlawful stops? Yes. Who authorized it? My father. The room was deathly silent, save for the clicks of cameras capturing the moment a daughter condemned her own blood. And you personally witnessed other officers falsifying reports, threatening citizens, and covering up violent incidents? Yes. Rivers took a breath, then asked the one question Aaliyah had been waiting for. Why come forward now? Tessa's voice wavered. Because I watched them tear down a girl on a roadside and call it justice, and I realized it could have been anyone. My guilt doesn't make it right, but staying silent makes me no better than them. Aaliyah stared, emotion warring in her chest. Fury, disgust, and something else she hated to admit. The faintest trace of respect for the broken honesty of it. The courtroom watched as Tessa detailed names, dates, patterns of abuse. She spoke of enhanced patrols, of reports discarded, complaints ignored. She named other officers, even the mayor, implicating them in cover-ups that spanned years. By the time she stepped down, her face was wet with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. Rivers stood again. Your Honor, in light of this testimony, the state moves to place the Briarwood Police Department under federal oversight and recommends immediate suspension of the mayor pending further charges. Aaliyah's heart pounded. The judge nodded gravely. Motion granted. The gallery erupted. Cheers, cries, the sound of a town cracking open. Aaliyah felt Malik's arms wrap around her shoulders as the weight of it hit. It wasn't over, but it had begun. And for the first time, it wasn't fear that filled the room. It was fire. The town of Briarwood hadn't known this kind of unrest since the race riots of '68, a fact the old-timers muttered about in church basements and barber shops, pretending they hadn't been on the wrong side of history back then. Now, history wasn't giving anyone a choice. By the weekend, the protests had grown from a few dozen people on courthouse steps to hundreds. Folks who had kept their heads down for years finally stepped into the sun with homemade signs and defiant faces. Dismantle the list, read one. Protect black girls, read another. And then there were the counter-protesters. On the other side of Main Street, a cluster of white residents waved American flags and backed the blue banners. Some held printed signs that said, "We stand with Whitmore and keep Briarwood safe." The irony didn't escape anyone. In the middle of it all stood Aaliyah. She hadn't meant to lead anything. She didn't see herself as some activist or symbol. She was just a girl who wanted to drive home from work in peace, but circumstances make leaders out of the unwilling. She spoke to the growing crowds, voice steady through the bullhorn. They said we had no proof, now we do. They said we had no voice, now we're louder than them. And they said this town couldn't change, we'll prove them wrong. Beside her stood Malik, a walking firewall against the town's hatred. Every time someone shouted from the other side, Malik answered back, never losing his cool. "You think this is justice?" An older white man spat from the opposition line. "You're tearing our town apart." Malik grinned. "Nah. We're just showing you what it looked like this whole time." That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the Briarwood church bells rang out over the streets for the first time in years, not for a holiday, not for a death, but for a reckoning. Inside the First Baptist Church, a town hall meeting was underway. It wasn't sanctioned by the city or the police department. It was organized by the people. The pews were packed. Black families who'd lived under Briarwood's thumb for generations, young activists from Atlanta, even a few white residents who knew which side of history they wanted to land on. Aaliyah stood at the pulpit. "My name is Aaliyah Reed," she began, hands gripping the wood, "and I wasn't supposed to survive this." She told them everything, the stop, the humiliation, the names on the list, the whispered threats. She spoke of Tessa Whitmore's confession, of the old injustices swept beneath tidy records. "I've heard people say we should move on, that the worst is over, but you don't get to tell me when I'm done bleeding." A standing ovation rose before she even finished. When the applause faded, a small voice called out from the back, "I was on the list too." A middle-aged black man stood, his face weathered. "They came for me in '92, put me in cuffs for a crime I didn't commit. Took everything." Then another. A woman in her 60s. "They ruined my nephew's life. That boy never came back from prison." The floodgates opened. Story after story poured out. Names called, dates spoken, a ledger of invisible wounds written into the town's foundation. Aaliyah watched them all, something breaking inside her. Not in pain this time, but in the fierce, unrelenting knowledge that she was not, and had never been, alone. Malik stepped up to the pulpit. "We're not just burning down a building," he said. "We're gutting the whole rotten system. And if they thought this was over after a couple court hearings, they got another thing coming." He announced plans to form an independent community council, a legal aid fund, a citizen oversight committee, no more secrets, No more lists. The crowd erupted again. Back outside, beneath the heavy sky, Aaliyah stood alone for a moment. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think you've won. This isn't over." No name attached, but she knew exactly whose hand it came from. She looked out at the street filled with protest signs and chants, at the church full of names no longer afraid to be spoken, and she smiled, because for the first time it was them who were afraid. The courtroom looked different now. Gone were the smug faces of uniformed officers sitting confidently in the gallery. The rows were filled instead with press, attorneys, and families of victims who'd spent too long in the shadows. On the left side sat Aaliyah, Malik, their mother, and half the congregation of St. John's AME. On the right sat the remnants of Whitmore's old guard, a few officers too stubborn to leave, a handful of pale-faced townsfolk gripping crumpled handkerchiefs like talismans against the tide of justice rolling in. At the front, presiding over it all, was Judge Monica Beale, a black woman known for her unflinching sense of fairness and a sharp tongue when it came to corruption. The perfect storm had gathered. The opening statements were electric. Deputy State Attorney Imani Rivers laid it bare. For years, the Briarwood Police Department operated not as a body of public servants, but as an instrument of terror against its own people. With lists, false arrests, fabricated reports, and sanctioned violence designed to maintain control. Rivers didn't just target Stanton or Whitmore. She named city officials, business owners, and school board members complicit in the cycle. And then came the testimonies. Marcus Turner's mother took the stand first. She recounted the night her son was found beaten by officers and left near the river. The bruises, the half-hearted police report. The heartbreak when the town said he'd been aggressive, despite never carrying so much as a pocket knife. She held up his old high school graduation photo for the courtroom to see. This is who they said was a threat. Aaliyah's throat tightened. She remembered Marcus, his laugh, how he'd taught her to shoot free throws at the rec center. Next was a retired officer, Harold Green, a black cop who left the department 15 years ago and had been living under threat ever since. His testimony cracked open the underbelly of the department like a rotten egg. "I tried to report them," he told the court. "I brought up the list. I brought up the beatings. I went to the mayor. Next thing I know, my house is vandalized. My pension's frozen. They made sure my life was worth less than dirt." When Malik played intercepted audio files confirming it, you could feel the air shift. The defense's faces paled. But it was Tessa Whitmore's testimony that detonated what little protection the department had left. She took the stand, hands trembling. "I was raised to believe we were protecting our town, that it was us versus them. But it wasn't about safety. It was about control, about fear, and I enforced it. I targeted black residents. I falsified reports. I stood by while people like Aaliyah were violated and degraded because I was told it was necessary." The room sat in stunned silence. "My father made me believe it was normal, that it was my duty." Then, with a steadying breath, she added, "It wasn't." Imani Rivers approached. "Miss Whitmore, were there others? Names we have not yet uncovered?" Tessa nodded and produced a written list, names previously omitted from evidence. Dozens of people long thought safely hidden by official silence. A sharp intake of breath cut across the room. Several people in the gallery sobbed quietly. Aaliyah felt a complicated knot of rage and relief inside her. This woman would never be forgiven, not by her, but some wounds needed witnesses to be properly seen. By the time court recessed that day, 4 more officers had been arrested. The mayor was formally indicted for obstruction of justice, and the town council voted unanimously to place the department under federal oversight. Outside, as dusk fell over Briarwood, reporters shouted questions. Protesters cheered. Malik handed out copies of the Community Oversight Board Charter. And Aaliyah. She stood in the same spot where it all began. The side of the road where Stanton had pulled her over, where Tessa had lifted her skirt, where the whole world first saw her not as a student or a daughter, but as an object of contempt. Now it was something else entirely. A makeshift memorial stood there now. Candles, flowers. A cardboard sign, "This is where change was born." Aaliyah knelt, lit a candle of her own. This wasn't the end, but it was the start. The months that followed cracked Briarwood open like a fault line splitting under pressure. The Justice Department arrived with forensic accountants and civil rights investigators. Every file, every arrest record, every disciplinary report in the police department was audited. Years of fabricated charges and ghost complaints unraveled like a cheap threadbare quilt. By winter, 12 officers were under indictment, 4 retired administrators were subpoenaed, and the biggest blow came when Mayor Carlton Hayes was formally charged with conspiracy and embezzlement, tied to payouts made to suppress cases like Marcus Turner's. He was led out of City Hall in cuffs, his smirk gone, his shoulders slumped. The town's old power structure, once so carefully hidden behind brick buildings and Sunday sermons, collapsed publicly and unapologetically. And through it all, Aaliyah remained the storm's unflinching eye. National media still called. Civil rights groups begged her to join their boards. Universities dangled honorary degrees and scholarships. But she refused to leave Briarwood, not yet, because some promises are made in the blood, in the dirt where it first happened. The newly formed Briarwood Justice Council met weekly in the old community center. Aaliyah presided alongside Malik and a growing group of elders, young organizers, and former victims. Together they drafted new civilian oversight protocols, arranged legal workshops, and established a victims' reparations fund funded by seized police pension accounts and forfeited mayoral assets. One evening, while stacking folders after a long meeting, Malik spoke quietly. "You realize what you've done, right?" he asked. Aaliyah raised a brow. "What's that?" "You made them afraid. Real fear. Not of riots, not of some petition, of truth, of their own damn people. This town will never be theirs again." Aaliyah stared down at the stack of names in her hands, people no longer invisible. "I don't want fear," she murmured. "I want justice, and then I want peace." But Malik knew better. You couldn't have one without burning the old ground down first. The town itself had changed. The police department's old sign was torn down. The station was shuttered, soon to be replaced by a community-led public safety board. Federal monitors conducted audits. State-appointed leadership would answer to the council. A new school board was elected. 3 of its 5 members, black for the first time in town history. The African American Studies program Aaliyah had fought for quietly reinstated itself, expanded even. And on the edge of town, at the spot where the roadside violation had occurred, a permanent memorial was erected. A wide bronze plaque inscribed, "For every name on the list, for every silence endured, this ground remembers." On the day of its unveiling, hundreds gathered. Former victims, activists, families, and press. Aaliyah took the mic last, under a crimson sunset. "I didn't ask for this," she began, voice even. "I didn't want to become the face of anything. I was just a girl on my way home. But history doesn't ask what you want. It asks what you'll do when the moment finds you." She gestured to the crowd. This town tried to erase its sins in quiet rooms, in locked drawers, behind badges and last names. And we dragged every last secret out into the daylight, not for revenge, but for every black girl who walks these streets now. So she'll never have to look over her shoulder, wonder if she's on some list, pray she'll make it home. A murmur of affirmation rippled through the crowd. Then, from the back, a voice called out, one of Marcus Turner's little cousins. "Tell it, Aaliyah." And she did. By the time the last candle was lit at the memorial's base, Briarwood wasn't healed. Not yet, but it was no longer a place where silence ruled. It was a town in reckoning, and reckoning was a kind of freedom. The first snowfall came early that year. It dusted the crooked rooftops of Briarwood like ash, covering the scars and freshly laid protest signs alike in soft white. For a moment, The town looked almost peaceful, as if the blood-soaked earth beneath it hadn't spent generations swallowing stories no one dared to tell. But Aaliyah Reed knew better. She stood on the steps of the new Briarwood Community Justice Center, the building that once housed the police department, now reborn under community control. Its new sign gleamed in fresh paint. For the people of Briarwood. Inside, work continued. Legal advocates took calls. Counselors met with families. The files Malik and the Justice Council had gathered, records of every injustice, every arrest, every coerced signature, had been cataloged, digitized, and made public. No more secrets. Aaliyah walked the halls, passing rooms where kids played chess and elders taught town history lessons, stripped of the polite lies from old textbooks. In one corner office, Malik grinned at a monitor displaying their growing legal fund, half of it raised by donors from around the country. "You believe this?" he asked. Aaliyah leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "Didn't think they'd care this much." "They didn't," Malik replied, without malice. "Not until we made them watch." A knock at the front door drew their attention. It was Tessa Whitmore. Her face was older now, hair cut short, dressed plainly in a heavy coat against the cold. She carried no badge, no air of authority, only the hollow-eyed weight of someone permanently exiled from the life she once owned. Aaliyah met her at the threshold. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Tessa said before she could be shut out. "I'm moving. Atlanta, maybe farther. I just wanted to see the place. What you built." Aaliyah studied her, searching for some crack in the performance, some self-serving angle. But what she saw was a hollowed-out version of the woman who once lifted her skirt under the hot glow of a police cruiser's headlights. And for once, no part of Aaliyah felt fear. "This isn't mine," Aaliyah answered. "It's theirs." She gestured toward the town, the school kids, the old men with faded signs, the mother still carrying fresh grief. Tessa gave a small, resigned nod. "I hope you burn the rest of it down too." And then she left. Aaliyah stood in the doorway for a long while, watching her fade down the street. Malik joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You could have spit in her face," he said. "Would have felt good for 5 minutes," Aaliyah admitted. "But I don't need her apology. I don't need her guilt. We took their house. I'm here to build ours." The snow kept falling. The new Briarwood was messy, bruised, and unfinished, but it belonged to them now. The Oversight Board issued its first official report that week. It recommended charges for 3 more former officials, restitution for families, and state grants for education and infrastructure neglected for decades. The council voted to rename Whitmore Avenue after Marcus Turner. At the unveiling ceremony, with snow clinging to their shoulders and night falling around them, Aaliyah spoke one last time. "History isn't what we inherit. It's what we force out of the ground, what we tear from the old hands, what we make them see, whether they like it or not." She looked out at the faces before her, no longer defeated, no longer quiet. This town tried to bury us, but we were seeds. And with those words, a new chapter began. The cold wind howled through Briarwood's empty streets that night, but in the community center's heart, the light stayed on. Aaliyah Reed's story had started on a lonely roadside. Now, it belonged to everyone. In the end, the memory of what had been was neither forgiven nor forgotten. It was recorded, taught, spoken aloud, because injustice isn't a ghost, it's a wound, and wounds only heal when named. The town of Briarwood, flawed, fractured, but no longer afraid, learned to speak those names, and for the first time in its long, haunted history, silence was no longer an option. Briarwood's story was never really about a single girl. It was about the power of witness, about what happens when one act of violence meant to humiliate and silence ignites something larger than itself. Aaliyah Reed didn't choose this fight. History rarely waits for volunteers. But in that split-second choice, to speak, to leak the files, to stand on courthouse steps and refuse to be shamed, she carved a path for hundreds of others. Stories long buried clawed their way to the surface. Names written off by official records were etched back into community memory. And as the Justice Center's walls filled with photographs and oral histories, it became clear that reckoning wasn't a single storm. It was a season. The system that had protected people like Douglas Whitmore, that had enabled men like Stanton to laugh as they violated a girl on a roadside, didn't collapse from shame. It collapsed under the relentless, public, undeniable truth. Brick by brick, witness by witness. Aaliyah's victory wasn't clean. It left scars. It left questions about justice and its limits, about who gets to be redeemed and who is too far gone. But what mattered was that the town's silence was broken. And somewhere in America, a girl saw Aaliyah's story and learned she didn't have to stay quiet either. That pain could be power, and that power, wielded by the relentless and the brave, could rewrite the ending.